This Shabbos, we're going to be learning Parshas Tazria and also Parshas Chodesh. So I want to say something that incorporates both. You know, Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Tazria, on the pasuk of Isha ki Tazria v'yoldo zachor, says Rashi, Omar Rabbi Simloi, Kishem sheyitzirosoi shel Odom achar kol beheme chayev oif. Just like man was created last after Behema Chayav Oif in Maisa Bereshis, Kach Toirosoi Nisparsha Achar Toiras Behema Chayav Oif. So also the halachas that apply to man are discussed after the Toiras Behema Chayav Oif. In other words, it would seem that Reb Simloi is bothered why the pasuk of Isha ki Tazria v'yolda, which is the Torah Sa'odom, comes after Parshas Shmini that concluded with Zois, Torah Sabehema v'ha'oif v'chol nefesh achaya harimeses b'mayim u'l'chol nefesh asheretzes ha'la'oretz, all the halachas of the kosher and non-kosher behemoths and chayas v'oifes. So he gives an answer that Kishem, she Yitzirosoi, Shel Odom, was after Behema Chayav Oif, so also Torosoi was Nisparish after Behema Chayav Oif. Well, I mean, the question is still there. It's just that he moved the question to somewhere else. In other words, the question now is not maybe about the Torosoi, because we can say that the Torosoi follows the Yitzirosoi, but the question is, why is the Yitzirosoi of Adam after Behema Chayav Oif? The question is based on the fact that we consider Adam to be more important, more significant, more choshev, and therefore it bothers us that Torah is nisparish after the Torah's Behema Chayav Oif. So now the question is, why is Yitzirosai after Behema Chayav Oif? The Sifsei Chachamim says that in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Ches, Amud Aleph, we explain the reason that he was created after Behema Chayav Oif. However, in the Brisa that's brought in Sanhedrin, we say that the reason is Kedei she'yikones l'su'udo miyad, in order that everything should be prepared for man when he's created. Kedei she'yikones l'su'udo miyad. So he was created last because of his chashivas, not because of his non-chashivas. So, l'chorah, this doesn't explain why Torosoi was nisparsha after the Torah's Behema Chayav Oif. I mean, we could say maybe he understood that what Reb Simloi is saying is that since he was created after Behema Chayav Oif, so the Torah follows that Seder even when it's discussing the Torah's Ha'odom and the Torah's Behema Chayav Oif. But that's avada not the mashmos of Reb Simloi's statement, because he says Keshem she Yitzirosoi shel Odom acha Behema Chayav Oif kach Torosoi nisparsha achar Behema Chayav Oif. So it's he's saying that for the same reason, not that the Torah over here is following the Seder of the Yitzirah, but for the same reason that he was created last, the Torah discusses his Torah list. So we need to understand that reason l'chorah doesn't apply over here. The reason of Kedei she'yikones l'su'udo miyad. So l'chorah, darf man sagen that Reb Simloi is following another opinion in that brisa that says that the reason that man was created last is she'im tazuach daitoi. If he'll be a balgaiva, oimrim lo yitush kodmecho, that he was created last in order that he shouldn't feel so good about himself. If he's tazuach daitoi olav, we say to him that the yitush, the fly, came before you. But it's enough to say that once. I mean, since he was created last, we already sent man the message that he's in a way less than Behema Chayav Oif. Why does it need to be repeated once again in the Torosoi Nisparsha Achar Behema Chayav Oif, as if he didn't yet get the message that Yitush Kodmecha? So it would be a talking, in this week's Parsha, it says ve'im loy simtza yoda deise by the yoledes ve'lokcha shtei soirim oy shnei bnei yoina echad la'oila ve'echad lechatas. So Rashi says lo hikdimo hakosuv elo limikra'o avol lahakrove chatas koidemes la'oila kach shaninu b'zvachim perek al atod. So that even though it says the oila first, it's not to say that the hakrava of the oila is first. Truth is that the hakrava of the chatas is first, but it's lemikra'o hikdimo hakosuv. So what does it mean lemikra'o hikdimo hakosuv? Rashi in Zvachim says on the Tzadik Amud Aleph, "Shetehei nikreis ba'inyan tchila, avo ba'avodason chatas kodemes." So we don't really understand. So what's the idea of shetehei nikreis ba'inyan tchila? Why should it be nikreis ba'inyan tchila if, in terms of the hakrava, the chatas comes first? So let the chatas be nikreis ba'inyan tchila. Tosfos says over there about Rashi, Tema, ma chidush uzeh. It's not clear from the Lashon HaTosfos how we understood Rashi, but he's saying, so, I mean, what's the chiddush that we read it first? Obviously, it says first. But the question is, I mean, so it says first, it's read first, but for what reason? I mean, why shouldn't it say the way it's korev? Tosfos brings in the name of the Rabbeinu Chaim that even though the hakrava of the chatas comes first, but the hekdish of the oil has to come first. And Tosfos argues, but we also need to understand what's the rationale behind this halacha that the Rabbeinu Chaim is mechadish, that lemikro'o means to call it hekdish. The oil comes first. Why should you have to be makdish the oil first if you actually bring the chatas first? So why is there a seder b'chlal in what you should be makdish first? And why is the seder that the oil comes first? So my father once said that in Zvachim Daf Zayin, the Gemara says, Amr B'Shem chatos lama ba'a, chatos lama ba'a lifnei oil, lepraklit she'nichnas, ritza praklit nichnas doiran achrov. Rashi explains, the chatos comes first, because the chatos is to get rid of the sin. First, you have to send in the lawyer to straighten out the problem. The praklit nichnas tchila. After you've settled the problem, then you can bring a doiron, then you can bring a present, then you could be miskarev to the king. That's why the chatos is kodemes la'oila. So kum techois, that be'emes in Maila, in Chashivas, the oila is greater. Because the oila is really where we're aspiring to get to. The oila is about doiroin. The oila is about connecting with the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's just that there's something in the way. I mean, you can't bring the doiroin before you get rid of the sin. Therefore, the chatas has to come first, and only then can you get to the oila, which is the most important. So, Mamela, the seder ha'akrove is take that the chatos is kodemes la'oila. But the seder of lemikro'o, like Rashi says, shetehei nikreis ba'inyan tchila. What do we read about first? What does the Torah talk about first? It talks about where are we trying to get to, in terms of what's more choshev. The chronological seder is chatas koydem la'oila, but the logical seder is oila kodemes lechatas, because the oila is where we're trying to get to. And that's the lemikro, the shetehei nikreis ba'inyan tchila. The gdima ba'inyan is the oila. So also we can say the Rabbeinu Chaim's idea of being makdish the oila first is expressing this, that where I'm really going is to bring an oila, but the chatas I have to bring first because I have to get rid of the sin before I bring the oila. Before I bring the oila, yeah. Now, in Parshas Sav, we have a pasuk, V'lovash hakoyin midoi bad, u'michnesei bad yilbash al besorei. So the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Minayin shelo, in Sanhedrin daf mem tes amid beis, zog the Gemara, Minayin shelo yahei dover koydem lemichnasayim. How do we know that the first thing he puts on is the michnasayim? So the Gemara says, Shenemar u'michnesei bad yiyu al besoroi. Rashi says al besori is mashma that there's nothing on his basar before he puts on those michnesei bad. So we learn from al besori that the michnesei bad are the first thing he puts on. So the Gemara says, "V'tana my time akdeme l'ksoinus." In the Mishnah, it says the ksoinus before the michnesei. So the Gemara mishum the akdeme kro, because the pasuk was makdim the ksoinus to the michnesei bad. Ukro my time akdeme. So why was the Torah makdim the ksoinus to the michnesei bad if the michnesei bad you put on first? Zok the Gemara mishum the mechasye kule gufe adifale, because it's adifale, the covering of the entire body. That's why the Tana and the pasuk talk about the velovash hakoyen midoi bad before the michnesei bad, even though the seder halavisha is that the michnesei bad are first, but the Torah talks about the midoi bad first because it's mechasye kule gufe adifale. The we don't understand why. So what's the mila of mechasye kule gufe, and therefore the Tana and the pasuk put the midoi bad first? And second of all, if there's a mila, so why don't you put on the midoi bad before the michnesei bad? If mechasye kule gufe adifale. So al korchoch, that it's the same type of idea. That in terms of the lechavoy du leseferes of the big day kohana, there's an adifus in mechasye kule gufe. However, first there has to be the kisoy ha'erva. First you have to take care of the basic necessities before you get to the lechavoy du leseferes of mechasye kule gufe. So the midoi bad comes last in the seder halavisha, not because it's less choshev, but because it's more choshev. So the Torah tells us in terms of the mikro'ah, the Torah talks about the logical seder, which is the seder of chashivas. The Torah puts the midoi bad, the ksoines, first, because that has the mile of mechasye kule gufe odifle. Whereas in terms of the practical doing, the michnesei bad come first, because the lechasas ervosoi takes place before the lechavadul seferes of the mechasye kule gufe. So lefize, it could be that Rib Simloi that says kishem sheyitzirosei shalodam achar kol beheim chayev oif kach toirosei nisparsha achar kol beheim chayev oif. He's saying that really it's not enough that yitzirosei is list, because the fact that yitzirosei is list isn't enough that we should be able to tell man how insignificant he is, how much he's less than behemoth chayev oif, because there's another mahalach to say that he was created less because he's choshev. Kadesh yikonis l'suda miyad. But now that the Torah repeats this seder for the same reason, it's obvious that man is taka less choshev than behemoth chayev oif, and that's why Reb Simloi is saying kishem she Yitzirosai was after behemoth chayev oif, so also Torosai was nisparsha after behemoth chayev oif. So you should understand that really you should view yourself as yitush kodmecha. In other words, and don't tell yourself that you were created last because of your chashivas. Because if in the Lemikro'o, in Parshas Tazria, you also appear last, it's obvious that you're taka less choshev, and not because you're more choshev. Now, in the Braise, Masechta Sanhedrin, Yitaka says, "She'im tazuach daito yolav, oimrim lo yitush kodmecha." But the Midrash in Parshas Tazria says it in a different nusach. It says that loy zacha, oimrim loy yitush kodmecha, shilshul kodmecha, zacha, oimrim loy ata kodamto lechol ma'aseh bereishis. That if a person is zoche, then we say to him, you are the first and foremost of all ma'aseh bereishis. If he's not zoiche, he's last and least, and if he's zoiche, he's first and foremost. Where is it merumas b'chlal that there's a dimension of man where that there's a possibility that man should be first? I mean, both in the Yitzirosai and in the Toirosai, he appears last. So based on what are we saying, that Zocha Oimrim loy ato kodamto l'chol ma'aser bereishis. The Medrash darshans it from a pasuk, Ochor v'kedem sartoni. That is a possibility that man is Ochor l'chol ma'aser bereishis, and there's a possibility that he's Kedem l'chol ma'aser bereishis. But in Torah, we find him always to be last, both in the Torasai and in the Yitzirasai. So why is that? Why is that? And what's really the meaning of Ato Kodamto L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis? I mean, the fact is that he wasn't Kodamto L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis. The fact is he was created on the sixth day after all Ma'aser Bereishis. So what does it mean that Zocha Oimrim Loi? How is it Oimrim Loi that Ato Kodamto L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis? It must be that both are true. Man as a creation, as a nivra, as a creature, is the last and least of all creatures. In other words, he's the most vulnerable. He's, in a sense, helpless. The other Ma'aser Bereishis, Achoikus Man Nosan Lohem Shelo Yishanu Es Tafkidom, they carry out their mission without a bechira, whereas man could be mekalkal, and therefore he's really least than all Ma'aser Bereishis. Therefore, in his Yetzirah and in his Torah, he's the least, because objectively, he is the least, and therefore he appears as the least in the written Torah. However, on the other hand, man could reinvent himself, meaning he could make himself into a Kodam L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis al Yidei his Bechira B'Toiv, and then he's a Rishon L'Ma'aser Bereishis, because really, that man is the Soif Maaseh, the Machshavat Chila. He was created in the Soif Maaseh because he's the Nezer HaBriya, because he's the crown of the Briya, because that's what the Rebbeinu Shalom really created the world for. So he's a Kodam L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis. In other words, that now he reaches the point where he's a Kodam Be'inyan. He's a Kodam in Chshivas. And then he reveals within himself that Madrega where he's created last for Kadeshi Kones Lesuda Miyad. Therefore, the Adam is never written first, because he's a first only within himself. He could create himself as a first, but he wasn't created as a first. And it could be that's why this appears in the context of Isha Kisazriya V'Yolda Zohar, the Parsha of Ubayoyim Hashmini Yimoil Besar or Losoi, as the Chinuch says in Mitzvah Beis, about the mitzvah of Milah v'ha'am hanivchor chafetz Hashem Yisbarach lahashlim tchunasai v'rotza lihiyois ha'hashlameh al yedei ha'adam, that man should make himself perfect. V'loi bra'oi sholem mi beten, he was created imperfect. Lirmoi zelav ki kashe tashlum gufoi al yodoi, that just like he completes his guf, kain b'yodoi lahashlim tzuras nafshoi behechsher pu'uloisov. So in this context, man appears as the least, but then comes the Bayoim Hashmini Yimel B'Sar Losoi, which is the beginning of the Knisa Sanefesh HaKdoisha, which is the beginning of all mitzvahs that a person performs, which is what makes him the Ato Kodamto L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis. That's how he makes himself the Kodamto L'chol Ma'aser Bereishis, the Kedem Tzartoni. Now, this is connected also with Shabbos HaChodesh. And let me say like this: the minig by Yidden is that we call the Suda that we eat on the night of Pesach a Seder. We also refer to the first night of Pesach, as the night of the Seder, the Leila Seder. It's kind of an interesting way to talk about what we're doing. I mean, true, we do everything in a very particular order. And in the base medrash of Rashi, they were even masakin 15 simonim of Kaddish or Chatz, that you should keep things in order. But is that the point? That this is a Seder, and that defines what we're doing? Gulas Mitzrayim and the mitzvahs of the night of Tesvav Nisan appear in the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. which L'chora indicates that HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is Shaykh to Geula. And so it's mafurish in the Medrash over there, in Parshas Boy in the Medrash Rabbah, where it says, Mishabachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba'olamoi, Kova Boi Roshei Chadoshim V'Shonim. Mishabachar B'Yakov U'Bonov, Kova Boi Rosh Chodesh Shel Geula. So the Chodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim Rishon Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana is a Chodesh Shel Geula, and this is something that has to do with Mishabachar B'Yakov U'Bonov. In the Sefer HaAkedah in Sha'ar Lamed Ches, he explains at length that Mishabachar Ba'olamoi Kava Lahem Roshei Chadoshim V'Shonim, that's the Seder HaTeva. Mishabachar B'Yakov U'Bonov is the Seder of Nisim. The Seder HaTeva begins with Tishrei, and the Seder of Shidud HaTeva, which literally means robbing the Teva, reframing, changing, redoing Teva, that begins with Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Chodesh of Geula. Now it's interesting that the Chazal say, Mishabachar B'Yakov Uvanov. This is something that's happening here and now, Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Tesvav Nisan, of the Beis Alofim Tov Mem Ches, when Yidden are exiting Mitzrayim. Why are we saying Mishabachar B'Yakov Ubanov? You know, on the pasuk HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim Rishon Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana, in which it was Neschadish, not only the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, but also that we count our year from Nisan. Rishon Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana, we count months from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Chodesh HaRishon, Chodesh HaSheni, and Chodesh Tishrei is the Chodesh HaShvi. So the Ibn Ezra on the pasuk says that Ein l'shemesh Chodesh klal, and on the other hand, Ein l'lavona shana klal. In other words, there's really no meaning to a shnas halavona, to a lunar year, because the lavona makes its rounds every 29 and something days, and you could make a year out of 20 such months. You can make a year out of 10 such months. There's really no reason that we make a year out of 12 months, and that's what he's saying. Ein l'lavona shana klal. So in other words, it was neschadish over here that we can actually make a shnas halavona. In other words, Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei hashana is the pshat that we make a year out of the sivuvim of the Levana, even though mitzad atzmam, they have no year. It's ein the Levana shana klal. As this comes, this expresses itself especially in the Shnas Ha'ibur, where we add a month. So in other words, we're really creating time. It's not objective time, it's subjective time that we are creating by ourselves, which means that we could rearrange time. We ought to, and we can rearrange time. We can be shoylet on Zman. Be'emes, in connection with the Ma'oros, we say that they are koyach ugvura nosan bahem liyos moishlim bekerev tevel memshelas hayoim memshelas halayla, as it says in the pasuk. But nevertheless, we can free ourselves of the memshelas hayoim and the memshelas halayla, of the koyach ugvura nosan bahem liyos moishlim bekerev tevel, and we could make time for ourselves. Now, that's in a sense the shidud hateva. In other words, that we are actually robbing nature of its memshala, and when a yid is davuk in Torah and he overcomes his own nature, it gives him the ability to redefine nature, even to the extent where time takes on a different meaning and different parameters. Now, in terms of the objective Seder Zmanim, Esav was the Bechor. Vayetze Harishon Admoni. But Yaakov bought the Bechor, and he turned himself into the Rishon. He turned himself into the Bechor. So that the Bechira B'Yaakov U'Bonov is really the Yesod of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, Rosh Chadoshim Rishon Lochem, L'Chodshei Hashana. It's the foundation of our ability to rearrange time. To rearrange time. If you look at the Yotzritz for Parshas HaChodesh, this is really all mavur from the Piyutim. Now Yaakov's taking of the brachas, is based on his taking of the Bechor, as it's mavur in Chazal B'Kama Duchti, that the Bechor is the one that's shaykh to the brachas, and since Yaakov was the Bechor, Anochi Esav Bincha B'Chorecha, he became Esav Bincha B'Chorecha when he bought the Bechorah, and therefore he gets the brachas. Now the brachas were given on the night of Pesach. As we know, the Chazal say that the Shtei Gedoyism is Echad Pesach ve'Echad Chagiga. So the brachas were given on the night of Pesach, and that's the Leil HaSeder. It's the night when we're this new Seder, the new world order that Yaakov Avinu became the Bechor and got the brachas. This is when it happened, and therefore the Seder of Leil Pesach, which is to celebrate the Nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which are based on HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, which is the Shidud HaTeva, which is based on our Shidud HaTeva, is really the Leil HaSeder because it's the new Seder. So the message of Zman Cheruseinu and the Leil HaSeder is that we could reinvent ourselves to the point that we could be the Rishon, even if we're the Achrei. We could, it's true that Toirosoi is Acher Behem Mechayev Oif. It's true that Yitzirosoi is Acher Behem Mechayev Oif, but we could reinvent ourselves and we could come to a massive of Ato Kodamto, L'chol Maaseh Bereishis. And this also connects with the Iker idea of Cherus, as I've said many times, in the Yehuda Halevi says, Avdei Hazman, Avdei Avodim Heim. Eved Hashem hu levadoi chofshi, which might mean that just like you can be enslaved by somebody else, you could be enslaved by your own self of yesterday. In other words, why don't we self-actualize today to the extent that we can, because of who we were yesterday and who we were the day before. In other words, we become enslaved by time, Avdei Hazman. We become enslaved by the me of yesterday. And Mamela, it's only Avdei Hashem, Hu Levadoi Chofshi, that we rise above that Avdus. And we move Me Avdus Lecherus, which is really bringing ourselves from the massive of Yitush Kodmecha, Shilshul Kodmecha, to the massive of Ato Kodamto, L'chol Maaseh Bereishis. Okay, I wish you all a good Shabbos.